Hello there. So in this video I'm going to be talking about the IB Diploma's CAS and specifically how to write a reflection for CAS. So I hope to give you a few tips and also save you a bit of time in this process. So to kick off then, why are you doing this? Why do you have to write a reflection? Well, these are the main aims really. Firstly, to think about why your experience was relevant, to have a chance for you to think about the skills and knowledge that you've actually got by doing the experience, to think about some strengths maybe for development if you do something similar in the future, to get a better understanding about yourself, the larger context, and possibly to think about some constructive feedback, how it can help you moving forwards. Okay, so how do you do this? It's pretty simple really. There's four main things you need to have for a very good reflection. Pretty much in this order really. Firstly, say what happened, describe what happened, why was it important, what really stood out for you, and also describe what went well, and if things went wrong, sometimes that's actually quite a good thing in a strange way. What didn't go so well, just describe that to start with. Secondly, you can think about more about your emotions. How did you feel about the experience? How did it go? Thirdly, you should talk about some of the choices you made when you were doing the experience. Why did you do certain things? If you did it again, what would you change? Would you change anything? Because that's a sign that maybe you've learned if you would do something differently. And then fourthly, think about the questions, think about some questions about the people, the processes, or the issues involved in the experience, a kind of wider question there. Alright, so how do you ask the right questions? How do you know what to ask? Well, at the first part, when you're describing what you did, if you remember that's the first ingredient that you need, think about these questions. Why did you make this particular choice? Why did you choose to do something? Was it because a friend told you to, or you thought it would be the right thing to do? How did the experience reflect on your own personal ideas and values? And in what ways were you challenged to think differently about yourself when you were doing the experience? And then when you're thinking about how you feel, the second part of the ingredients, ask yourself these questions. How did you feel about the challenges? What happened that prompted those particular feelings? And what choices could have resulted in different feelings and outcomes? So be fairly reflective about that process. And you can see after you've described, the first description kind of leads into the second part, how you feel about what happened. In general terms, this is, I think, really useful to break down a reflection. Essentially, you want to say, what did you plan to happen? Firstly, describe it. What actually happened? And then think about what's the difference between the first two answers and why is there a difference? And that's really the key thing to a good CAS reflection. It's worth maybe asking this quite early on in the process to get an overview about what actually happened and what you wanted to happen. Was there a difference? So the good news with CAS reflections is that you don't actually have to reflect on every single experience. This is definitely not a box-ticking exercise where you have to go through parrot fashion and repeat reflection after reflection. It's supposed to be a chance for you to actually sit back and think about what happened and be useful for you. So that's the first thing. You don't have to reflect on every experience. Second thing, pick out key moments. What were your highlight, standout moments during CAS that really worked for you? And this would be something personal that was really effective. Think about a moment that you discovered something. It could be you learned a new skill, you learned how to speak a new language, you learned how to make a video, something like that. You overcame a challenge, you'd booked something and it got cancelled, something got in the way. Was there a strong emotion that you felt, either relief or concern or anxiety, or maybe you just did something cool like the skydiving image from earlier here. What was it that really stood out for you? And the key thing is it's very much about the quality of your reflections. It's not about the quantity of how many you do. So please do bear that in mind. The reflections themselves, people don't realise this sometimes, but they don't have to be just only written. If you prefer to be a bit creative, is CAS after all, then you're welcome to do that as well. The IB guide, the official guide, recommends several things. These are some of them. You could take photos and use those to reflect in some writing. You could even compose a song with a friend describing how you helped children during an experience. You could dramatize a poem that sums up what happened. Even a short video, like a blog, that sums up your experience and talks about the things I mentioned earlier. That would be fine. And even a poster highlighting maybe a shared experience. You could do that with somebody else. They would all be fantastic types of reflection for you to do. Here's an example of a really good CAS reflection. It's not overly complicated, but it does the job. And you can see I've color-coded here the 4 ingredients on the left. Describe what happened, how do you feel about it, the choices that were made, and then some questions at the end maybe to move forwards. And you can see in the main text here, I've color-coded to show where the student meets these things. Starts with a brief description, after school football. Second paragraph talks about how it felt, it's good, gave me some confidence. Third paragraph is a bit longer. It's going to talk about the choices that were made and why they were made. So that's useful. You can pause here if you want to read this in detail. And fourthly, overall, thinking about some questions for maybe future events. Okay, so there's a sample reflection there for you. And lastly, just to finish, some top tips I think that are really useful for CAS. If you did work in a group, talk with that group about the experience. You don't have to all have exactly the same reflection, and indeed you shouldn't have all the same reflections. But talking about it first, reflecting on it, looking back, working out what went well, what you would do differently, those are all good things. So that can be a useful starting point. Secondly, the reflections are the main way that your CAS coordinator is going to decide if you've met the 7 learning outcomes. If you remember, you have to meet those to complete CAS. So obviously if you've done 30 experiences, doesn't mean you have to do a reflection for every single one, okay? You just have to make sure you've met the 7 learning outcomes at least once during the 18 months that you do CAS. That's really important. And your CAS coordinator is going to look at the reflections pretty carefully to make sure that you've met those learning outcomes. So talking about those learning outcomes will make it a little bit easier for the coordinator to see, obviously, where you've met them. And finally, as a general tip, I find as a CAS coordinator, one thing I've learned is that when things don't go quite as you planned, or even if they go disastrously and it goes all wrong, there's actually more useful in terms of learning. It won't feel like it at the time when your plans have gone up in smoke, but generally when things go smoothly, that's great, but you maybe don't learn as much because you're not being pushed or challenged. When things go wrong or go badly, then actually that's a chance for you to sit back and think, why did they go badly? What would you do differently? And you can learn from that. And after all, that's really what the reflections are about, the chance for you to sit down and think, right, what have I learned from this? What did I enjoy? What did I gain? And also, crucially, what would I do differently if and when I do these things again? All right, thank you very much. I hope that's given you some ideas about how to write CAS reflections.